Is it possible to duplicate real spiritual feelings with our little black music dots? Hi, I'm Dr. Doug Pugh, and in this video, I'm going to review the newly released hymn 1007, As Bread is Broken, from the new LDS Hymnal. It's a gorgeous sacrament hymn by Stephen A. Reynolds. I think you're going to love it. As I review this hymn, I want us to consider this question of the possibility of inducing spiritual feelings in a listener, feelings evoked simply by combining certain notes on a page. This is a question I've asked myself and tried to prove in my own music for many years. Can I help someone feel something simply by combining certain notes together? While I know it's impossible to make or force someone to feel something, I do believe that certain combinations of notes can easily bypass the mind, logic, skepticism, even downright hatefulness, and get down into the listener's heart. Music is magical in that way. For many years, I've actually collected chords and melodies and musical phrases that, for me, push all my emotional buttons simply by the combination of the notes. And I'm really delighted to share that in this hymn, we find multiple instances of note combinations that get as close to creating spiritual feelings in someone as any I have known or studied. I'll cover these as part of the 5 techniques I'm highlighting in this video today. Technique 1, clever copy and paste composition. Here at the beginning of As Bread is Broken, there's a beautiful little copy and paste technique that this composer uses. Now that sounds cheap and tawdry. Oh, you just copied and pasted. No, but this is clever copying and pasting, which is great. Another way to say this is the composer found a little motive that they repeat throughout the hymn in different ways to connect the tissues of the hymn together in one tapestry. It's like the golden thread through the tapestry, okay? So we see this at the beginning, and what we're seeing is really, at first, a sequence, but then it sort of graduates into this sort of motivic repetition. The motive I'm talking about is in the first full measure. So we start with a little pickup. As bread is broken, we think of thee. That's that first full measure. Da, 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 dee, da, dum. So we have a stepping down, a repetition, and then a leap up of a third, and then a big leap down of a fifth. That big leap becomes something that is characteristic in this hymn. All right, then in the next bar, thy broken body, we have another little pickup. It's slightly different than before. It's the same notes, as you'll notice, but they're in different orders. See, originally we have C, E, D, but now we have C, D, E, which leads us to this second blues selection here, where we get the repeated motive a step higher. So again, the first time, as bread is broken, we think of thee. And then the second time, thy broken body on Calvary. So see, body on Calvary, measure 3. If you compare it to measure 1, it's that quarter note on G, a step higher than measure 1, stepping down, repeating it on F, just like measure 1 does, and then up a third to A, and down a fifth, and repeat the fifth to D. So it's precisely the same little motive. When we hear it at the beginning, it sounds like a sequence. A sequence is when you take a little bit of melody, you play it, and then you step it up or step it down, and you do it a few times. What's a little bit different about this one is it's not a perfect note-for-note sequence. It's more of part of the motive gets sequentially placed in measure 3. So it's a little bit disguised is what I'm saying. It's a nice way to disguise a traditional technique, but to still use the power of that technique. Now, this is where the third time, as you can see in blue, may we remember thy suffering. The motive occurs again, but now it's not in direct sequence. It's quite a bit higher. So the first one starts on F, back in measure 1, F, E, E, G, C, C. The second one, measure 3, starts on G, G, F, F, A, D, D, and then D, C, C. You see how that starts the same? That starts just the same as the first one and the second one, but instead of doing that fifth that we saw before, now it's coming down the scale. Da, 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 dee, da, dum. Which, in a sequence, we do expect that the third time we hear the motive that it's going to spill out a little bit differently, which we certainly get here. And that was the climax moment. May we remember the highest note, so it comes down. It's like you reach the top of the mountain, now you got to come down. But then very cleverly, we're not quite done with this motive. We get the motive again at the end with broken hearts, thy grace impart. We get part of the motive again, but it's not in the same order. So we get that fifth that we've had a couple of times before, but it now starts the measure instead of ending the measure. So it's a very cool way to create motivic connection throughout your piece of music. Technique 2, warmest of warm, fuzzy wonders. At the very beginning of this hymn, we have one of these incredible moments where by the combination of notes, for me, emotions just go kapow. When you hit this chord on the word thee, I defy anybody to resist the feels that come from this chord. It's truly special, and I'm so glad we have this in one of our pieces in our tradition now. So first, let's look at the melody. I mean, we discussed the melody in the last technique, but there's something interesting about this. We start the tune, and it's relatively simple. We're sticking to the main notes of the triad, and it feels done. Okay, we settled back on C where we started. It's the tonic note. It's the first note of our scale. Of course, we want to settle back on it. So it doesn't sound particularly wowing when we get to the melody note of the word the that I've highlighted in blue. But when you hear the chord that accompanies it, it's really special. Let me play this for you. Those suspensions just get me every time. So we have a 4 chord. It's the regular old 4 chord, except the alto and the tenor from the previous chord, the B and the G, they carry over into the 4 chord. Now the 4 chord is F, A, C. There's no G's or B's. So when we hit the downbeat of the word the, we have not just one, but 2 dissonances. The B against the C, that potent half step that then resolves down to A, and we have a warm 9th and the tenor is resolving down. And so if you just play tenor and alto together, it sounds like normal thirds, because it is normal thirds, but it's the combination of those 2 particular dissonant notes on the accented downbeat of a 4 chord, not between chords, but accented dissonances on a downbeat that then resolve. It's a double suspension, a 4-3 suspension in the alto and a 9-8 suspension in the tenor. And it's just simply beautiful. And it's made even more beautiful by the fact that the 8th note before it, when the alto gets to the B, that is also a juicy chord itself. It's not just a regular 1 chord. It's a 1 with a major 7th that creates the tension already and then carries the tension over above the 4 chord. I mean, this is just, for me, one of those moments where notes bypass any kind of thought, logic, skepticism, anger, hate, whatever bad mood I'm in. You play those chords, and I feel it. I feel the spirit. I can't resist it. And it's in the notes. Technique 3, emotional musical remembering. Here we are in the end of measure 4, going into the downbeat of measure 5. This is the moment of climax in the melody. It's the high point. good melody writing always has some place the melody is going, a climax, and then it comes away from that climax. Sometimes it's a low climax. More often it's a high climax. And on this particular spot, may we remember thy suffering sore. That's the climax. And I find it very interesting, and I'm almost positive, I don't know for sure because I don't know this composer, but I'm almost positive that they selected the word remember on this climax note in a sacrament hymn because it's part of our covenant that we will always remember him, right? Wow, what a cool connection of doctrine and musical interest. Well, talk about musical interest. Let's talk about how to make a moment like this even more interesting. So you're composing a hymn, you're composing a primary song, and you know you've got a moment where the melody has reached its climax, but you want to do something that makes it all the more wowing, wowing spiritually. Of course, we're not trying to show off with our music, but we want to create as much juice emotionally as we can at that climax moment. So this is done first by the melody itself, by getting up to the high note and then coming back down. Excuse me, but it's done in two additional ways that I want to highlight because they're excellent techniques that you should use in your writing too. So when we get to the word we, may we, in measure 4 here, highlighted in blue, we're on a 5 chord, and we're stepping up through it with passing tones to get to re. So it's just 3/8 notes of 5 chord. But on the third one, on the re, the bass steps down to F. That's important because F is part of this chord, G, B, D, F, but F is the 7th. 7ths are volatile. They need to resolve. They're like a chemical, like a chemical that needs to react. Okay? But when you put that 7th in the bass, you have to react. It's so emotionally potent. It's got to resolve. It has this incredible gravity that wants to resolve to the 1 chord in first inversion, which this piece does. So listen to that. Can you hear where it wants to go? It wants to go down. It's irresistible. It needs to go down. Okay, the 7th goes down. Now, what's happening with that is a big tension was created in the bass, and the tension resolved right on the moment of climax. While it does, the melody creates a new tension on that downbeat. So the bass line had a tension, the 8th note before the downbeat, and it resolves very tastefully on the downbeat, while precisely at the same time, the melody leaps above the chord tone and hits a non-chord tone dissonance on the same downbeat in the melody, creating an additional tension that then resolves to beat 2 and ends up taking us all the way to measure 6, where we have this really special warm feel, which we'll get to in technique number 5 in just a minute. So the melody, the D does not fit the chord. There's no Ds in a C major chord, and then it resolves. So as the bass resolves, the soprano creates a new tension. The bass is about to get, the bass has tension, and as it resolves, the melody gives a new tension and then resolves. That's a great way to add juice, emotional juice to your climax moment. And that particular technique in the melody is called an appoggiatura, where you leap to a non-chord tone and you step. And that usually happens on beats, which makes the tension all the stronger. Technique 4, deliciously breaking Bach's writing rules. All right, we're back in the same spot, and now we're going to continue the progression. There's so many things happening here that I have to break them down into separate techniques. So we just had that big climax on May We Remember, and then we have this special spot where we go, thy suffering sore. We've got to highlight that. That's the essence of the intonement. We have to do something musically to create the feels right there. Okay, and there's two biggies. First is technique 4, and next is technique 5, which we'll get to in a minute. So, like we talked about in the last segment, we hit that top high note, remember thy suffering. Now, they could just play that 1/6 chord the rest of the bar. That would work, okay? But it doesn't create that extra sense of ooh. So what happens is on beat 3, the bass steps down to D while the alto steps down to F. So we get the 1/6 chord, and then on Suff, this is a D minor 7 chord. Now look at the left hand, the 7th, D, C, and then the F in the alto. That creates a very specific shape. A minor 7th and a perfect 4th. We have the root, the 3rd, and the 7th of the chord. Now, ignore the soprano and look what happens. That chord steps up identically on the fring of suffering. So, suffering, suffering. That is totally against Bach's rules, which sometimes is wonderful. You know, I get a lot of flack from some people saying, you're being old-fashioned. Aren't you open to new forms of voice leading? Of course I am. My point of view is you should learn the rules first. Learn them, love them, use them, become an expert on the rules, and then you can tastefully alter them and create your own music founded upon the good, solid principles of old-school part writing. And that's what's happening here. What we're seeing with that interval, D, C, F, going up to E, D, G, that's a minor 7 chord happening in what we call planing motion. This is something Debussy invented, where you take a shape of a chord, and instead of resolving the chord around the circle of fifths like we do in Bach's kind of harmony, we go linearly up the scale or down the scale using exactly the same shape. Debussy will often do this with dominant 7th chords or other types of chords. In this case, it's done with a minor 7th chord. So the bass, the tenor, and the alto on suffering create that sound. Now, why does it not stick out in our ears as a huh? Because it could easily stick out as something that does not fit into the flow of this particular piece. The reason it works so well here is there's contrary motion. Contrary motion gets you out of all sorts of issues. The soprano's coming down, and as the soprano comes down, we get that upward planing motion in the other voices, and they're all leading us to a more important point, which is the word soar on the downbeat of bar 6. Where we get a repeat of that incredibly juicy, or at least partial repeat of that incredibly juicy suspension we talked about at the top of the piece. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's technique 5. Anyway, so look, see how the soprano comes down. Remember thy suffering sore. As it comes down, we get the upward planing. That's a beautiful addition to this really important climactic phrase. So we had in technique 3 that double tension resolve happening 1/8 note apart on remember, but then we got, what are we going to remember? We got to remember the suffering. So there we have this juicy, interesting contrary motion Debussy moment that's leading us to the soar on number 6, bar 6, which is in our next technique. Beautiful writing. Technique 5, breaking hearts with contrary motion. So we're continuing that same spot. We've been focused on this climactic moment because there's so much happening there. We've taken us from remember thy suffering sore, the downbeat of bar 6, where we return to the 4 chord with that suspension, just like we saw back in technique 1. So we've heightened the awareness of the remembering, how important that is in our sacrament covenant. And then we get a little more. remember thy suffering sore with broken hearts, right? With a broken heart and a contrite spirit is what the lyrics are getting at. So we want to continue some sense of emotional feeling there to exude the broken heart feeling. Once we've hit the downbeat 4 chord, we get down to the 2, which is a substitute, pretty typical substitute for 4 chord. But now comes the magic. We get a couple of special types of motion that create a special feel on the word broken. Did you hear that? Broken. Ooh, why does that feel so good? Well, there's a lot of great motion happening here. And as you can probably tell from most of the things I've said in this piece, a lot of these cool things are happening because of certain types of horizontal motion, tension and resolve through horizontal motion, not just vertical chords. So if we look on this first blue chord here, we get to that E in a passing way. Very smooth writing. The tenors are doing the opposite, passing down. The soprano is also passing down in sixths with the tenor, but the altos are taking the C that the tenor started with and repeating it. So we have contrary motion between soprano and tenor and bass, but then we have this oblique motion of repetition in the alto, and it's the repetition against the contrary motion that creates that sound. So we get the open chord, and we go contrary while the alto stays there, and then it resolves. That's a great, very quick, very subtle, but great way to get that broken heart feeling musically with just notes. Okay, so 1 chord, C, E, G, with a 7th on it, the B, but it's a major 7th, which sounds very different than, which would be a dominant 7th, which this is not. It's a major 7th, but it's inverted with E in the bass, and we put the B in the middle right next to the C minor 2nd, which gives that, feel. It's the same feel that we had way back in Technique 1 up here. In fact, it's the same exact interval and notes, C and B. We get that again down here, C and B, but now it's redressed with a revoicing on the 1 chord that's leading us to hearts. Now, I want to highlight a very well done bit of motion this composer used on the word hearts. We're in a very dangerous harmonic spot here where you could easily have tons of illegal parallel motion that would totally ruin the resonance that they've created in this piece. So when you have chords that are in root position and the chord next to it is another chord in root position and the bass is stepping, that's danger for parallel fifths and parallel octaves. So we don't only get that once, we get it twice. We have a 4 chord on the 2nd syllable of broken, stepping to a 3 chord on hearts, which steps back to a 4 chord on thy, giving us plenty of opportunities to step in the manure pile of parallel fifths and parallel octaves. The key to solving this is contrary motion. Okay, so once again, motion strikes. On the 2nd syllable of broken, we have F, A, C, F. Then we go up in the women's voices and down in the men's voices, and then opposite direction. Okay, again, little small details that do a lot, right? By small and simple things, great broken hearts shall be brought to pass. So the whole phrase together. And I also love how the 2 blue chords here, bro of broken and hearts, those 2 chords are substitute chords for each other, 1 and 3. And they both give us added G here by adding the 7th to them. The 1 chord has that major 7th on it, and the 3 chord has a 7th on it. It's the D in the alto, and those add this additional sense of ooh. So as you're looking for ways to make those ooh feelings in your music, you should come back to this hymn and borrow from these techniques because they work. So what's my opinion of this hymn? If you can't tell already, to me, this is an absolute stunner. I love it, and I can't wait to program it in my ward. I'm sure we're going to enjoy this hymn for many, many years to come in our sacrament meetings. If you'd like to download the harmonic analysis I've done on this song, I've dropped a link below this video in the description box. It's a free download with no strings attached. Be sure to watch the next video in our series of this new LDS hymnal reviews. In this next video, I'll review hymn number 1008, Bread of Life, Living Water. If you're enjoying these videos, please hit subscribe and ring the bell so you'll get notified each time I provide a new video with great LDS music writing techniques. See you in the next one.